Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming back. Why are you laughing?
I was making a fish face when you started.
Shan was fish facing.
Okay, so we are here for another episode of Go Team Writers Live. And if you are curious about how you can ask us a question for these, sometimes on blog posts, we'll have something about, hey, if you leave a comment, then you can enter in the Rafflecopter and you can ask us a question for Go Team Writers Live. The most common way is those who participate in Friday exercises with Shannon, the writing exercises, then they will get to ask a question that way. So we really appreciate the questions, really appreciate getting to see your guys' writing on the blog. That's super fun for us, really fun to see you guys encouraging each other in the comments and loving on each other. So that's such a blessing to us. So we have 3 questions today that we're going to try to answer. This first one is from Claudia. Claudia says, how do you go about plotting a series of books and dividing an idea into books? And this is not something I know much about, and Shan hasn't had much experience with it either. So we are going to defer to Jill and her wisdom on this one.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, the first series I wrote, my whole plan was I knew what I wanted to happen in the end, and I thought that I wanted a trilogy, and that's really all I had. And so then I had to make it up as I went. I was like, well, book 2, they'll travel around the world that I made because it's so awesome, and I have this map. And it worked out okay. I managed to make it work out. But since then, I've tried to plan a little better when I'm doing a trilogy. And so if we start with the idea of a trilogy, it's really easy to plot it because you just look at it like a 3-act structure that's 3 books. So you have each book has its own plot, but the trilogy itself has its own plot. And so you can break it up really nicely. And usually that means the end of book 2 is this kind of cliffhanger. It's that dark moment. It's the lowest point. And that's why a lot of book 2s end that way, because it's the trilogy itself has that 3-act structure. And if you look at it that way, you can kind of break it down. And that's pretty much what I do for that. If you're writing a duology, you can do the same thing. You just need to treat those 2 books as if there's a 3-act structure between them. And that puts kind of the spot between the 2 books is the very middle of your 3-act structure. And so then a little ways into book 2, you'll have that darker moment. And so that's kind of what I do. I just kind of break it up like you would a graph, I'm like, okay, we're going to parse it out and see kind of where this will go. And I just try to come up with the concepts, the ideas. I'm not a major outliner. I like to get enough of a plan, and then I kind of free write from there, and things change and then I have to fix it. But that's kind of what I do. And then if you have like a really long series, if you're thinking like, like this mystery novel series that just goes on for 40 books, or even something like Melanie Dickerson writes, they're all standalones romances, but they take place in the same kind of the same country or whatever. You can almost do that whole, it's the same plot every time. Different, that and that's a series too. It's just a different kind of series, and it's just the same kind of thing. And you can have overarching like character changes going on within a series that's big like that. You can have like, oh, now my character is going to get married and have children or whatever, or maybe my character is going to go to college, and these things can be happening. But every story in a series like that could still be, and it's still a mystery, and he's still going to solve a crime and save the day in every book. So there's that way of handling it.
Excellent. Shannon, did you have anything you wanted to say about plotting a series?
I always feel so much smarter after I listen to Jill talk for a little bit. I think I just don't write that way. I think that if I had the opportunity to write a series that's that big, I would have to shift my brain into a different gear. So I guess my advice would be, if you don't write this way, if this isn't something you've done before, don't panic. I wrote a series. I published a series with a major publishing house that was 3 books, and I did not have all 3 of them plotted out before I signed that contract. I think that the way I write is I write my first book, and if I realize I'm introducing things I want to examine later, then that ends up kind of sliding into book 2 or book 3, and I'm able to kind of, like Jill said, you mess a lot of it up in the drafting, and then you kind of go back, and at that point is when I decide, look, I'm going to need 3 books to tell this story, or I'm going to need 6 books to tell this story, whatever it is. And then, after that first draft, that would probably be closer to what I would do, just because my style of plotting is different. But I just feel so smart after Jill talks, so I love listening to her talk about this stuff.
All right, let's move on to our next question, which is from Allison. Allison wants to know, how do I avoid cliches in my stories? And this is one that the three of us kind of talked about before the video. And it's tough because there's really no clear way to say if you write in this specific way, then you'll always be able to avoid cliches. I think part of the drafting process is always going to involve some cliches. You're always going to an extent, pick familiar phrases, maybe some things that you don't even realize are cliche phrases. They're so a part of your vernacular, you may not even recognize them until you're in editing mode later. Same with plot choices, that sometimes we choose plots that are very obvious at first, and later we think of more creative ways to do things. So I would encourage you, Allison, to recognize that it's part of the process sometimes. Don't beat yourself up if you find yourself using a cliche. We all go through that. And the great thing about recognizing that you've done it is that now you can look for something a little more creative, push yourself a little harder to come up with something different. Shannon, do you have any other advice on that?
No, I mean, I think my advice is just not to panic when you see that you've used a cliche or you've stumbled into a cliche. I think there's kind of two categories. There's kind of that micro, like the cliches within a sentence structure. And then there's like the overwriting. We talk about having the chosen one, well, that's so cliche. There's always a chosen one. Well, there's a reason that there's always a chosen one. And again, there's not always, but in certain styles of books, there's a reason. It's because it works. It's because people want to read about that. So, I mean, if that's the kind of story you're writing, you're just not going to be able to avoid certain cliches. But within your own sentence structure, I think you can avoid. We say a lot of times when things go wacky or crazy, it was turned on its head. Well, you're smarter. You're able to kind of take that sentence and revisit it and come up with a better way to say that, something maybe that's more applicable to your story world or to your character and their voice. So you can avoid smaller cliches simply and easily. Bigger cliches, I mean, you just got to decide. Am I okay with this? Am I not okay with this? And don't panic at the outset. You're going to write a zillion drafts of that book before it's done. And my guess is a lot of them get weeded out in the editing process. Jill?
Let's see. I like to add that if you find stereotypes or cliches in your story, like your character or something that's happening, if you find your beta reader saying, yeah, I saw that coming, those are things you want to fix because you don't want to be predictable. And if your character is just this totally cliche person, look for ways to make them more unique. You don't have to necessarily change their trope. Like I have this evil villain character in my last book, and he was so cliche. He was like the perfectly handsome, womanizing evil villain brother. And I didn't know what to do to fix him. And so I made him a gardener, and he always carries a plant with him. And so that makes him a little crazy and weird, but I just thought giving him this bizarre interest made him more interesting. And
like Neville, he's like Neville.
Yeah, you just look for something to make this person more human, because that's part of the problem. A lot of times is they're just fitting, like they're the perfect hero and everything about them is give them some flaws. We liked flawed people, and look for something just kind of off the wall can really help you. And then, if you're going cliches by sentences, you can do a search for the word like. That'll help you find your similes anyway. It's like this, it's like that. And you can see, if it's one that's used over and over, just change it. Find a way to say it in your character's voice. Just twist one on its head. Instead of it's raining cats and dogs, it's raining, I don't know, basketballs, whatever. You get the idea.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on to our last question. This one is from Julian. Do you have any tips for creating fantasy creatures? I feel like my fantasy trilogy that I'm editing could really use some unique creatures, but I dislike making copies of other animals. Is there a good way to create fantasy creatures? And I think we'll start with Shannon on this one.
So I feel like I've answered this question before. I may have even done it in a Go Teen Writers live episode. So I'm guessing you can kind of find the answer. And I know I've done it in a blog post on Go Teen Writers. If you look up magical creatures or something, you'll be able to find it. But my answer to this is just simple. And I want you to keep it as basic as possible. If you think about Harry Potter and you think about boggarts in Harry Potter, do you remember the boggarts? Every boggart looked different to each individual character. It was whatever scared that character the most. That's what the boggart turned into. So it was kind of the shapeless creature that took form when you looked at it, and then it was your greatest fear. I think that all magical creatures, or all fantasy creatures, however you want to say that, should really follow that model. I think not that it has to scare your character in that way, but it should be really specific to your story. I think that when you're creating I don't think you should just randomly add in cows with teeth because that sounded cool to you. I mean, if you want to, go for it, because maybe you can build around that. But to me, the best creatures in a story are the ones that pull something out of the character because they're terrified because of that, or they're a character, or they're a creature that forces the character to look at their innermost self, or it has to be very specific and really pull something interesting out of your ensemble cast, out of all of your characters, out of one specifically, however you're doing that. I was thinking of just as I'm talking, CJ Redwhite in her Defiant story, she has like this creature, it's been a while, I don't know what she calls it, but it's like an underground snake or whatever, and for whatever reason, with the way she developed it is so perfect because it feeds on the fears of people and the monster within. She's able to play that up very well. So I think your creatures should really apply directly to your plot and to your storyline. They have to bring something out that matters. If you think about, again, in Harry Potter, the Thestrals, those were very specific because Harry was dealing with death and only people who had faced death could see them. So I think use kind of stories out there. Look, why was this magical creature in this story? Why was this fantastical creature created? And begin to see the patterns, why authors use different creatures. So that's my thought. Jill?
Yeah, I did a big blog post on this too on Go Teen Writers. We should put both of our links in the description of this video. Mine is more of a nuts and bolts kind of thing, but totally on what Shan said. The most important thing is to give these creatures a purpose. Don't just have them because to have them for a reason. Why? Ask yourself, why do you need a creature or more? Is it supposed to be a warrior? Is it a food source? Is it a predator? Like, what's the point of this creature and how does it work into your plot? And then nuts and bolts wise, decide, is it a herbivore, an omnivore, a carnivore? Does it, I have a little creature creation chart you can use to brainstorm all this stuff. How is it perceived by humans? Are they afraid of it? Do they stand in awe of it when they first see it? Are they disgusted by it? Are they like, that's disgusting? How do humans interact with it? Where does the creature live? Is it in a burrow? Does it spin a web? Is it under the water? Like that kind of stuff. Does your creature have defense mechanisms? Can it camouflage itself? Turtle style. Just look at our creatures. There's so many wonderful animals in this world to go and get inspired by. What's its daily life like? What does it have? Mating rituals, stuff like that. That's the kind of the stuff that I like to think about.
Wow, that's great, you guys. Shannon, did you have anything else to add on that?
No, I feel smarter when Jill talks.
I know. It's so great. Okay, well, that is all for this video, you guys. Thanks again. We love your questions. We love interacting with you. And stay tuned for the next video.